What if the future of humanity, in the eyes of the ancient Sumerians, did not begin with human choice at all? What if civilization was not remembered as something people slowly invented, brick by brick, law by law, city by city, but as something that descended in one of the strangest traditions preserved from ancient Mesopotamia? Power does not rise from the earth. It does not emerge from a battlefield, a council, a tribe, or a crown seized by ambition. It comes from above. The ancient account says that kingship descended from heaven. That single idea changes everything, because if kingship descended, then the first cities were not just settlements. They were not merely places where people traded grain, built walls, and counted cattle. They were stages in a sacred drama. A cosmic order had touched the earth, and humanity was expected to live inside it. Picture the land between the rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates move through a wide plain of reeds, mud, canals, fields, and dust. The horizon is low. The sky is immense. At night, the stars appear not as distant ornaments, but as a vast ceiling full of signs. Beneath that sky, the Sumerians built cities from mud brick, raised temples on platforms, and carved wedge-shaped signs into clay. They lived in a world where the human and divine were not separated by silence. Every city had a patron deity. Every temple was more than a religious building. It was the house of a god. The city did not belong only to its people. It belonged to a divine power. And the king ruled because that divine power allowed him to rule. But here is the mystery. The ancient tradition does not present civilization as a straight line of progress. It presents it as a sequence, a pattern, a chain of cities receiving kingship, holding it, losing it, and watching it move somewhere else. Why would a civilization remember its own beginnings in this way? The ancient text describes kingship descending first to Eridu, not to a mountain fortress, not to a battlefield, not to a palace of conquest, to Eridu, one of the oldest sacred cities in southern Mesopotamia. In later memory, Eridu was associated with deep antiquity, wisdom, and the god Enki, a deity linked with fresh water, craft, intelligence, and hidden knowledge. Archaeologists know Eridu was one of the earliest major urban and religious centers in southern Mesopotamia. Its temple levels show repeated rebuilding over long periods of time. One sacred place was built, then rebuilt, then expanded, as if generation after generation returned to the same location because something about it mattered. The ancient text describes something different from archaeology. It speaks not in soil layers, pottery sequences, and temple phases, but in sacred memory. It says kings ruled for impossibly long spans of time, tens of thousands of years, numbers so vast they cannot be treated as ordinary biography. Historians generally do not read these reign lengths as literal records of individual human rulers. They are usually understood as symbolic, mythic, ideological, or theological expressions of remote antiquity. They may signal that the earliest age was not ordinary time. It was an age closer to the gods, an age where power was larger than human scale. But why make the numbers so immense? A king who rules for 30 years is historical. A king who rules for hundreds or thousands of years is something else. He becomes a figure of cosmic memory. His reign is no longer just political, it becomes part of the architecture of time. The first ruler named in this tradition is Alulim of Eridu. The name appears in the ancient list as part of the age before the flood. He is not presented with a personal story like a hero in an epic. We are not told his thoughts, his fears, his battles, or his death. He is almost like a marker placed at the beginning of human order. That absence is powerful, because the mystery is not what Alulim did. The mystery is why his reign needed to be remembered at all. What kind of civilization preserves the names of kings from a world so distant that their lifespans become impossible? The answer may lie in how the Sumerians understood order. In their world view, order was fragile. Fields had to be irrigated, or they turned to dust. Canals had to be cleared, or they choked with silt. Cities had to be protected, or they fell to rivals. The boundary between abundance and disaster was thin, so kingship was not merely administration, it was the force that held back chaos. A king was expected to maintain temples, support offerings, defend the city, organize labor, judge disputes, and preserve the favor of the gods. If he failed, disaster could follow. Not only political disaster, but cosmic disorder. Famine, invasion, flood, disease, and collapse could all be interpreted as signs that the bond between heaven and earth had been damaged. This is where the ancient cycle begins to take shape. First, order descends. Then a city becomes the vessel of that order. Then kingship remains there for a time. Then something changes. The power moves. The text does not explain the movement in ordinary political terms. It does not say a council voted, a dynasty negotiated, or a population migrated. It says kingship was transferred, as if authority itself had a life of its own. Could this be one of the earliest ways humans tried to understand history? Modern historians might say the movement of kingship reflects shifting political dominance between cities. One city grows powerful, another replaces it. The list turns messy human conflict into a sacred sequence. It transforms rivalry into destiny. But modern interpretation cannot erase the deeper question. Why did the scribes frame political change as a heavenly rhythm? Maybe because in ancient Mesopotamia, history was not random. Events had meaning. Victories, disasters, floods, eclipses, failed harvests, and the death of kings could all be read as signs. The world was a text, and priests, scribes, and diviners learned to read it. Imagine a scribe in a temple school. His reed stylus presses into wet clay. Each wedge is small, deliberate, permanent once baked by sun or fire. He copies names from an older tablet, perhaps from a tradition older than his own city. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak, names from a world already ancient to him. Was he recording history, myth, theology, or warning, perhaps all of them at once? The strange power of the Sumerian tradition is that it refuses to fit neatly into one category. Archaeology gives us cities. Texts give us sacred memory. Historians give us interpretation. Modern readers bring questions the ancient scribes never asked in the same way. But the pattern remains. Civilization begins with a gift from above. Humanity receives structure. Kings rule. Cities rise. Time stretches beyond ordinary scale. Then The order moves. This movement matters because it suggests something unsettling about human civilization. The Sumerian account does not imagine power as permanently owned. No city keeps kingship forever. No dynasty can hold the sacred order beyond its appointed span. Authority may descend, but it can also depart. What if this was not only a myth of origin, but a meditation on collapse? The Sumerians knew cities could die. They knew walls could be breached. Temples could be abandoned. Canals could fail, and names could fade. They lived close enough to the forces of nature and war to understand that civilization was never guaranteed. That is why the phrase kingship descended from heaven is so haunting. It sounds like a beginning, but hidden inside it is a warning. If something descends, it can ascend again. If order is given, it can be withdrawn. And if the gods grant civilization, what happens when humanity no longer deserves it? The ancient account does not answer immediately. It lets the names unfold. The first city holds power. Then another receives it. The cycle begins quietly, almost ceremonially. There is no thunder yet, no flood yet, no destruction yet, only the slow movement of sacred authority across the land. But this first movement already contains the shape of everything to come, because a cycle is not a straight road. It returns, it repeats, it rises and falls. It gives humanity the illusion of permanence, then reminds every generation that even the greatest cities stand on borrowed time. This may be why the Sumerian memory of kingship still feels alive. It speaks to a fear that has never left human civilization. We build systems, nations, towers, technologies, laws, and empires. We tell ourselves they will endure because they seem too large to vanish. Yet the first known cities of Mesopotamia also seemed protected by gods, kings, temples, and sacred order. Their scribes still imagined that power could move away. So the first mystery is not simply where kingship came from, it is why the ancient Sumerians believed civilization depended on a force greater than humanity, and why that force never stayed in one place forever. On the clay tablets, the story begins with descent. But the moment kingship touches the earth, another question awakens beneath it. If heaven gave humanity the order of civilization, who decided when that order would be taken away? Why would an ancient civilization place the fate of humanity inside a sequence of cities? The earliest Sumerian vision of the human world is not centered on one kingdom alone. It moves across a sacred landscape, city by city. The old tradition names places that seem to stand like markers at the edge of memory: Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak. To a modern listener, they may sound like ruins, names from maps, labels in museums, but in the ancient imagination, they were not dead locations. They were living centers of order. Each city carried a role. Each one held a piece of the world. Each one seemed to receive power for a time, then surrender it to another. What if the first map of civilization was also a map of destiny? Picture southern Mesopotamia, when the land was still being shaped by water. The rivers did not behave like straight lines on a modern map. They shifted, they flooded, they carried silt across the plain. Marshes opened and vanished. Canals had to be cut and cleaned. Reeds grew thick along the waterways. Boats moved where roads could not. In such a world, a city was not simply a place where people gathered. It was an act of resistance against chaos. Mud brick walls rose from a landscape that could dissolve under rain and river. Temples climbed upward from flat ground. Storehouses guarded grain against hunger. Scribes counted offerings, labor, animals, and land. The city made time measurable. A harvest could be recorded. A debt could be remembered. A ruler's name could survive on clay. Human life, which disappears so quickly, could be pressed into symbols and made to endure. But the cities named in the ancient tradition are not all understood equally by archaeology. Some are better known than others. Some remain shadowy. Some appear with clearer material remains. Others survive more strongly as sacred names inside texts. This difference matters because it reminds us that ancient memory and archaeological evidence do not always speak with the same voice. Archaeologists work with earth, brick, pottery, bones, seals, foundations, and broken objects. Ancient texts work with meaning. They preserve how people wanted the past to be remembered. Sometimes the two meet. Sometimes they drift apart. In that gap, mystery begins. Eridu stands at the opening of this sacred geography. It was connected with deep antiquity and with the god Enki, lord of wisdom, fresh waters, craftsmanship, and hidden intelligence. The image is powerful. The first great station of order is linked not with brute conquest, but with knowledge from the deep. In Mesopotamian thought, fresh water was not ordinary. Beneath the visible world was the Abzu, the subterranean watery deep associated with life, fertility, and divine wisdom. Enki's connection with this realm made Eridu feel like a place where creation, intelligence, and civilization touched. Why begin a world cycle with water hidden beneath the earth? Because in southern Mesopotamia, water was life, but water was also danger. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant ruin. The same element that fed the fields could erase villages. So, a city connected with sacred water carried a double meaning. It was a source of blessing, yet it stood beside the very force that could someday overwhelm human order. Then the tradition moves to Bad Tabira. Its name is often understood in relation to metalworking or craft, though exact interpretations are debated. In the ancient sequence, Bad Tabira becomes another station of power, another place where rulership rests for an immense span of mythic time. This introduces a new kind of clue. Civilization is not only religion and kingship, it is also technique. Fire, metal, tools, furnaces, labor, and skilled hands. The ancient imagination does not present the earliest cities as identical. One city suggests watery wisdom, another evokes the power of craft. The cycle of humanity is already more than politics. It is a network of sacred functions. Could the scribes have been preserving an old memory of how civilization formed through specialized centers? Historians are careful here. They do not treat every city name meaning as a direct historical report. Yet they do recognize that cities in Mesopotamia often had strong divine and economic identities. One city could be famous for a god, another for a temple, another for a political dynasty, another for a scribal tradition. In a world of competing city-states, identity was sacred currency. The list continues to Larak, a place far less vivid in the archaeological imagination. Larak is mysterious precisely because it is not as firmly present in modern awareness. It appears in ancient tradition, but the material and historical picture is less clear. This is where silence becomes part of the story. A city can vanish in more than one way. It can be destroyed by war. It can be buried by sand. It can be swallowed by changing rivers. It can lose its population, its cult, its political role, its name. And even when the name survives, the place itself may become uncertain. What happens when a city remains alive in sacred memory but fades from the ground? The Sumerian tradition does not pause to explain Larak. It simply gives the city its place in the sequence. This is unsettling. It suggests that the scribes inherited names whose sacred authority mattered even when their full stories may already have been old, partial, or obscure. Then comes Sipar, long associated in Mesopotamian tradition with the sun god Utu, known later in Akkadian as Shamash. The symbolism changes again. From water and craft, the pattern turns toward sunlight, judgment, truth, and vision. The sun god was not merely a bright presence in the sky. He was the one who saw. Nothing could hide from the sun's path across heaven. In later Mesopotamian legal and religious thought, the sun god was closely linked to justice because he illuminated what was concealed. That makes Sipar a powerful station in the ancient cycle. The sacred landscape now includes not just the forces that create life, but the force that witnesses human behavior. And here, a deeper possibility emerges. Perhaps the earliest cities are not only political stops. Perhaps they resemble cosmic principles arranged across the earth-water. Craft, hidden wisdom, judgment, and eventually warning. Because the sequence ends with Shuruppak. Shuruppak is one of the most fascinating names in early Mesopotamian memory. It is associated with Ziusudra in Sumerian tradition, a flood survivor figure later echoed in broader Mesopotamian flood stories under different names. It is also connected with wisdom literature, especially teachings attributed to Shuruppak, where fatherly instruction is given to a son. This city feels different. It does not merely hold power. It stands near catastrophe. Imagine Shuruppak as a place of voices, a city of elders, households, grain, canals, temple routines, and warning. A father speaks to a son. A ruler receives knowledge. A world continues as if nothing can interrupt it. Then the tradition says the flood comes. But the meaning of Shuruppak is not only disaster, it is memory, just before disaster. It is the last human station in the old order. The final city in the ancient sequence becomes a threshold between one age and another. Why would the last city of the earliest world be remembered not only with kingship, but with instruction? That detail carries a haunting psychological power. Societies often create wisdom literature when they feel the need to preserve order across generations. Advice from parent to child is more than morality. It is survival. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not act recklessly. Respect boundaries. Choose words carefully. Guard the household. Honor the social order. On the surface, such teachings seem ordinary, but placed near the edge of a world-ending flood tradition, they feel charged with urgency. It is as if humanity is being told how to live just as the world is about to be judged. Modern scholars do not claim that these traditions give a simple historical chronicle of the earliest cities. The enormous reign lengths, sacred transfers, and flood framework belong to a mythic and ideological way of remembering the past. Yet archaeology confirms something equally important. Southern Mesopotamia really did produce some of the world's earliest urban experiments. Cities, temples, administration, writing, and organized labor emerged there with extraordinary intensity. The ancient scribes were not inventing the importance of cities, they were interpreting it. To them, the city was where heaven touched earth. The temple was not decoration, it was the center. The ruler was not merely a strong man, he was part of a divine arrangement. The fields were not simply economic resources, they were signs of balance between human labor and cosmic favor. This makes the sequence of early cities feel like a ritual map. Each location receives the sacred burden. Each holds it under the gaze of the gods. Each becomes a vessel of order in a world that constantly threatens to return to mud, water, and silence. But there is a disturbing pattern hidden in this map. The cities do not save the world. Their temples, rulers, rituals, and names do not stop catastrophe from arriving. The sacred order moves through them, but it does not make them permanent. Even the city closest to wisdom, even the city linked with judgment, even the city associated with instruction cannot prevent the breaking of the age. What does that say about civilization? Perhaps the ancient Sumerians were not simply celebrating their cities. Perhaps they were confessing something more unsettling. They knew that human order could become magnificent and still remain vulnerable. They knew that sacred buildings could stand beneath a sky that gave no visible warning. They knew that history could feel stable until the moment it was not. The names Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sipar, and Shuruppak become more than places. They become stages in a drama of rise, responsibility, and loss. The ancient city is a promise, but also a test. It gathers people together, magnifies their power, multiplies their achievements, and exposes their failures. A village may fail quietly, a city fails loudly. When a city collapses, thousands remember. Temples fall silent, families scatter, gods are said to depart, archives break, roads vanish, songs become fragments, names survive only because someone pressed them into clay and hoped the future would listen. That may be the most haunting part of the early Sumerian cycle. It does not begin with abstract humanity. It begins with locations, real places, sacred names, cities that once meant order, cities that became memory. And if the ancient scribes placed humanity's fate inside a chain of cities, perhaps they were asking a question that still follows every civilization. Can a city become so powerful that it mistakes borrowed order for permanent destiny? What kind of disaster is powerful enough to divide time itself? In the ancient Mesopotamian imagination, the flood was not merely an event, it was a boundary. On one side stood the first cities, the enormous reigns, the strange age when kingship seemed closer to heaven than earth. On the other side stood the world human beings could recognize shorter lives, contested kingdoms, fragile dynasties, and cities struggling to rebuild order from mud. The flood did not simply destroy buildings, it changed the meaning of history. The ancient account places a terrifying interruption inside the human story. Kingship descends, cities rise, rulers hold power for spans so vast they feel supernatural. Then, suddenly, the sequence breaks. The flood sweeps over the world. There is no long explanation in the oldest king list tradition, no emotional description of families running through water, no scene of animals crying beneath black skies, no thunderous speech explaining every divine motive. The line is brief, almost cold. The flood came, then kingship descended again. That brevity is haunting. Why would a catastrophe remembered as world-ending be described with such restraint? Perhaps because the scribes did not need to explain what water could do. In southern Mesopotamia, every listener understood. The rivers gave life, but they also threatened it. A canal could nourish a field, but a broken water system could ruin a settlement. A seasonal flood could be blessing, but an uncontrolled flood could become a force beyond prayer. Imagine the plain after weeks of rising water. The walls soften. Mud brick returns to mud. Storage jars crack. Grain rots. Roads vanish under brown currents. Fields lose their boundaries. A family standing on a roof can no longer see where the street was. The temple platform still rises above the water for a while, but even sacred height begins to feel small beneath a drowning sky. To the ancient mind, this was not only nature, it was meaning. What if the world itself could be washed clean? The Sumerian flood tradition survives in fragmentary form. It does not give modern readers a perfect, complete story. Parts are broken, lines are missing, names and motives are difficult. But one figure stands at its center, Zeusudra, a ruler associated with survival through the flood. The ancient text describes the gods making a decision that affects humanity. It describes warning, preservation, and a chosen survivor. The details differ from later versions known from Akkadian and Babylonian tradition, but the shape is unmistakable. A divine decision is made. A flood comes. One human line is preserved. Life continues, but not as it was. This is where the Sumerian flood becomes more than disaster. It becomes selection. Not everyone is saved. Not every city endures. Not every name passes through the waters. The flood functions like a gate between ages, and only what is chosen can cross. Vaidhyasudra. The name is often understood as meaning something like life of long days or he of long-lasting life, though translations and interpretations can vary. In the story, he is not a warrior who defeats the flood. He does not command the waters to retreat. He survives because knowledge reaches him, and because he responds correctly. That detail matters. The flood is not overcome by strength. It is survived through warning, obedience, ritual, and divine favor. This pattern appears again in later Mesopotamian flood narratives, especially in the story of Atrahasis and in the flood episode of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the survivor is known as Utnapishtim. These are not identical texts, and historians do not treat them as copies of one simple original. They belong to a long tradition of retelling, reshaping, and theological reflection. Yet they share a disturbing idea: humanity can become vulnerable to destruction by forces outside human control, and survival depends on receiving knowledge before catastrophe arrives. What if the most important treasure in the flood story is not the boat, but the warning? Archaeology offers a different kind of evidence. Excavators in Mesopotamia have found flood layers at certain ancient sites, including places such as Shuruppak, Ur, and Kish. These layers show that serious local flooding happened in parts of the alluvial plain, but archaeology does not confirm one single universal flood covering the entire world at one moment. The evidence points instead to real floods, sometimes severe, remembered and interpreted through mythic imagination. That distinction is essential. What ancient texts describe is a cosmic flood that resets human order. What archaeologists find are physical traces of flooding in specific places and periods. What historians often suggest is that memories of devastating regional floods may have contributed to stories that became theological and literary accounts of world destruction. But myth does something a flood layer cannot do. A flood layer tells us water came. A myth asks why. For the Sumerians and their cultural descendants, the question of why could never be separated from divine order. If the gods governed the world, then disaster was not meaningless. It might be punishment. It might be noise control. It might be a decision among divine powers. It might be a reset when human life had somehow grown unbearable, unbalanced, or dangerous. Later, Mesopotamian traditions developed this theme with unsettling clarity. In Atrahasis, humanity's increase becomes a problem for the gods. Human noise disturbs the divine realm. The gods send plague, drought, famine, and finally, flood. This does not mean every Sumerian text says the same thing. It means later scribes explored the terrifying possibility that human civilization itself could become excessive. Too many people, too much sound, too much activity, too much disruption. How could ordinary human life become a cosmic offense? That idea sounds strange to modern ears, but it reveals something deep about ancient civilization. Cities amplify humanity. A city is louder than a village. Its rituals are larger. Its labor is organized. Its conflicts multiply. Its hunger grows. Its demands on land and water increase. Its rulers reach farther. Its temples require offerings. Its canals reshape the earth. Civilization creates order, but it also creates pressure. The flood story turns that pressure into a mythic crisis. Humanity expands until the divine world reacts. The very success of human society becomes the reason it must be limited. This is one of the darkest insights in Mesopotamian mythology. The danger is not only evil, the danger is excess. Life multiplied beyond balance, noise rising beyond tolerance, civilization growing beyond the boundaries set for it. Could the ancient flood be a warning against imbalance, rather than simply a memory of water? Modern interpretation must be careful. It cannot claim the Sumerians were predicting climate collapse, modern urban anxiety, or future global disaster in a literal sense. That would be anachronistic, but it can recognize that ancient flood myths speak to recurring human fears, environmental vulnerability, divine judgment, social disorder, population pressure, and the collapse of systems people believed were stable. The flood is terrifying, because it removes boundaries. Before the waters rise, the world is divided, city and field, temple and street, canal and bank, house and road, human and animal, sacred space and ordinary space. A functioning civilization depends on distinctions. Everyone knows where things belong. Then the flood comes, and distinctions disappear. The field becomes river, the street becomes canal, the house becomes debris, the temple becomes an island. The dead and the living drift through the same water. What had been organized returns to the undifferentiated deep. This is why the flood is more than punishment. It is uncreation. The Sumerian world began with order drawn out of watery potential. The flood reverses that movement. It takes the shaped world and dissolves it. It makes the earth resemble the primeval condition again, when human boundaries had not yet been established. And yet the story does not end in total annihilation. A survivor remains. A seed of humanity crosses the waters. The cycle resumes, but altered. Kingship descends again, not into the same untouched world, but into a world marked by memory. The post-flood age is not innocent. It begins with the knowledge that civilization has already failed once. That memory would have mattered in temple schools, where scribes copied ancient lists and stories. A young student learning the names of old kings would encounter a frightening interruption in the sequence. The tablet itself teaches that even sacred order can be broken. What lesson did the scribes intend? Perhaps they wanted to legitimize later kings by placing them inside a divine pattern. Perhaps they wanted to connect their city's authority with a primeval past. Perhaps they wanted to explain why human history felt broken, why the present age seemed smaller than the mythic age of enormous rulers. Perhaps they preserved inherited stories because the flood was too powerful to forget. Or perhaps the flood gave ancient people a way to think about the most frightening truth of civilization. Everything humans build depends on conditions humans do not fully control. The rivers must behave. The rains must come rightly. The soil must remain fertile. The canals must be maintained. The gods must be honored. The community must remain ordered. Break enough of these conditions, and the city becomes vulnerable. The flood story compresses all vulnerability into one image: water rising beyond measure. There is a chilling beauty in that image. Water has no anger on its face. It does not need weapons. It does not argue. It simply rises. It enters the lowest places first. It takes the weak walls. It carries away the unprepared. It makes human power look temporary. This may be why the ancient flood still grips the imagination. It is not only about something that may have happened in the deep past. It is about a pattern every civilization fears: expansion, confidence, imbalance, warning, denial, catastrophe, survival, reconstruction. The flood resets the world, but it does not erase the question that caused the terror. If humanity survived because one person received a warning, then the greater mystery is not how the waters came, but why so few were able to hear what was coming. Why would the first great power of the renewed world gather around a city whose name later became a title of authority? In the old Mesopotamian tradition, when the waters of catastrophe no longer define the human story, kingship does not return randomly. It descends to Kish. The name stands with a special force in early history, because Kish was not remembered only as one city among others. Its name became a symbol. To be king of Kish could mean more than ruling Kish itself. It could suggest wider authority, a claim that reached beyond local walls. That is the first strange clue. A city becomes a title, a place becomes an idea. Kish rises in the memory of Mesopotamia as a center where power is gathered, named, organized, and made visible. This is not the same world as the primeval age of impossible reigns and shadowy cities. The human landscape now feels closer, harsher, more political. Rulers contend, dynasties rise and fall, cities compete for land, water, trade routes, labor, and divine favor. Yet the ancient scribes still describe kingship as something handed down from above. What if human politics, in their eyes, were never merely human? Imagine the city at dawn. Mud brick walls catch the first light. Smoke lifts from ovens. Donkeys move through narrow streets. Workers carry baskets of clay and reeds. Priests prepare offerings. Scribes sit with tablets, recording grain, labor, oil, livestock, fields, wages, and temple goods. The city breathes through administration. This is where power becomes practical. A ruler may claim divine favor, but someone must still count the barley. Someone must organize canal work. Someone must settle disputes, supply labor gangs, protect caravans, and maintain the buildings that mark the city as sacred. Kingship is heavenly in origin, but it survives through earthly systems. This creates one of the most important tensions in ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Power needs gods, but power also needs records. The temple stood near the center of this world. It was not just a place of prayer. It was a house of divine presence, an economic institution, a storehouse, a workplace, a ritual center, and a symbol of the city's relationship with the unseen. In a Sumerian city, the god was not abstract. The god had a dwelling. The god had meals through offerings. The god had festivals, priests, lands, and possessions. To serve the temple was to maintain the bond between heaven and earth. This is why kings and temples could not be separated. A king who neglected the temple was not simply impious. He endangered the city's order. A king who rebuilt a shrine, restored offerings, dedicated statues, or repaired sacred walls could present himself as the one who kept the world aligned. But there is a deeper question. Was the king the master of the temple, or the servant of the god who lived there? Ancient royal inscriptions often present rulers as chosen, beloved, appointed, or strengthened by deities. They boast of building temples and restoring divine houses. But these claims are not the same as modern political propaganda alone. In that world, building for the gods was part of the ruler's identity. The king had to show that he was not ruling for himself. He was maintaining a cosmic assignment. That does not mean every ruler was humble. Mesopotamian kings could be ambitious, violent, strategic, and intensely political. City-states fought, borders shifted, rival rulers claimed superiority. Yet even ambition had to speak the language of divine order. Kish becomes important because it represents a new stage in that language. The city's prestige suggests that authority could expand beyond one local sacred household. A ruler could seek recognition that his power mattered to the wider land. The title King of Kish later appears in ways that suggest a claim to broad political importance. Even when the ruler's actual center might be elsewhere, why would later rulers want that title? Perhaps because Kish carried memory. Perhaps it represented the first recognized seat of restored authority. Perhaps its name became a symbolic key, a way of saying, "My rule belongs to the legitimate pattern." To claim Kish was to claim a place in the sacred rhythm of kingship. Modern historians often interpret these traditions as political theology. That phrase means power explained through divine meaning. It does not reduce the belief to cynical manipulation. It recognizes that ancient people understood legitimacy through gods, temples, omens, rituals, and inherited stories. A ruler without divine recognition was unstable. A city without divine protection was exposed. The cycle of kingship was therefore not just a mythic list, it was a map of legitimacy. But legitimacy had to be performed. It needed visible signs. One sign was temple building. Another was correct ritual. Another was victory in war. Another was prosperity in the fields. Another was justice. A king who could protect canals, secure harvests, honor gods, and defeat enemies could appear aligned with the divine order. A king who failed could be remembered as abandoned, cursed, or unworthy. This creates a disturbing possibility. In Mesopotamian thought, collapse was not always explained as bad luck. It could be read as a verdict. If a city fell, perhaps its god had withdrawn favor. If a dynasty ended, perhaps its appointed time had expired. If famine struck, perhaps order had been violated. History became readable, but that also made it terrifying. Every disaster might carry a message. What if the people living through decline did not know whether they were suffering politics, nature, or divine judgment? The temple world intensified this anxiety. Ritual was meant to keep the relationship stable, but ritual also reminded people how fragile that relationship was. Offerings had to be repeated. Festivals had to return. Sacred statues had to be cared for. The gods' houses had to be maintained. The same acts, performed again and again, suggest a universe that does not stay balanced by itself. Order must be renewed. This is where the idea of covenant, though not always named in the same way as later religious traditions, becomes useful as a modern interpretation. The city lived under a sacred arrangement. Humans served the gods. The gods granted life, fertility, kingship, and protection. The ruler stood at the dangerous meeting point between obligation and blessing. Break the arrangement, and the world could tremble. Ancient Sumerian thought also included the concept of divine powers, or decrees often called me in modern transliteration. These were not simple laws in a courtroom sense. They represented ordered aspects of civilization and cosmic life kingship, priesthood, crafts, sexuality, truth, power, music, scribal art, and many other functions. The me suggest that civilization itself was imagined as a structured set of divine gifts or principles. That idea transforms the city into something extraordinary. A city is not merely people living together. It is a container for divine functions: music, writing, ritual, authority, justice, craft, and social rank all become pieces of a sacred order. To lose them is not just to suffer cultural decline, it is to fall out of alignment with the pattern that makes human life civilized. Could the cycle that decides humanity's future be the cycle of receiving, misusing, losing, and seeking these divine powers again? The story of Kish raises this possibility because it shows kingship returning as an institution, but under conditions of struggle. The renewed world does not become peaceful. Power still moves, cities still compete. The sacred order still refuses to remain fixed forever. Archaeology gives this period a different texture. Early dynastic Mesopotamia shows a landscape of rival city-states, increasing social complexity, elaborate burials in some places, temple economies, administrative tablets, cylinder seals, and monumental building. The evidence does not show a perfect sacred harmony. It shows organization, inequality, creativity, violence, and ambition. That is exactly what makes the ancient memory so compelling. The texts speak of heavenly kingship. The ground reveals human systems. Between them stands the real engine of civilization, belief turned into institutions. A temple belief becomes a building. A divine name becomes a city identity. A ritual obligation becomes an economic system. A royal claim becomes a political order. A mythic memory becomes a legal and social reality. This is how invisible ideas become visible civilizations. But invisible ideas can also become dangerous. If a ruler believes he is chosen, how far will he go to defend that choice? If a city believes its god has granted supremacy, how will it treat its rivals? If people believe disaster signals divine anger, who will be blamed when the canals fail or armies arrive? The sacred order gives meaning, but meaning can sharpen conflict. Kish therefore stands as more than a rebuilt beginning. It is the moment when the divine cycle enters the machinery of history. Power is no longer only a primeval wonder. It is administration, title, territory, and ambition. The gods remain above, but the scribes are below, counting the grain. The ruler stands between incense and account books, between temple hymns and battlefield decisions. This is where humanity becomes fully responsible. The renewed world has received kingship, but now it must prove it can carry it. The city must maintain rituals, feed its people, manage water, restrain violence, and honor the gods. The ruler must be strong without becoming monstrous, sacred without forgetting mortality, ambitious without breaking the pattern that gives ambition meaning. That balance is almost impossible, and perhaps that is the hidden tragedy of Mesopotamian kingship. The same institution, meant to preserve order, also concentrates the power that can destroy it. The king guards the city, but he can also lead it into war. The temple blesses society, but it can also accumulate wealth and hierarchy. The sacred title gives unity, but it can also justify domination. So Kish becomes a mirror. It reflects the promise of civilization restored and the danger built into restoration itself. Humanity is not destroyed. Kingship returns. Cities rise again. Temples speak again. Records are written again. But the old vulnerability has not vanished. It has only changed form. The threat is no longer only water from the outside. It is power from within. If kingship descends as a sacred gift, and temples preserve the bond between heaven and earth, what happens when the human hand that receives the gift begins to believe it owns the source. How could humanity become dangerous simply by being alive? One of the most unsettling ideas in Mesopotamian tradition is not that human beings rebelled against the gods in some dramatic war. It is not that people stormed heaven, stole a forbidden weapon, or declared themselves divine. The danger is stranger than that. Humanity became too loud. In the ancient Atrahasis tradition, preserved in Akkadian, but rooted in the older Mesopotamian world of divine labor, creation, and cosmic order, human beings multiply across the earth until their noise disturbs the god Enlil. The complaint is not framed like a modern legal charge. It feels more primal. Humanity's presence has become unbearable. Their sound rises upward. The gods can no longer rest. At first, this seems almost absurd. How can noise decide the fate of the human race? But in myth, noise is rarely just noise. Noise is pressure. Noise is crowding. Noise is uncontrolled growth. Noise is the sign that life has expanded beyond its assigned boundary. A quiet world can be governed. A loud world demands attention. It interrupts. It pushes upward. It refuses to remain invisible. Imagine the Mesopotamian plain filled with settlements, fields, irrigation canals, herds, workers, families, rituals, quarrels, births, funerals, festivals, grinding stones, boatmen, temple drums, animal cries, and voices calling across the water. Civilization is not silent. It hums, shouts, sings, bargains, prays, argues, and mourns. To humans, that sound is life. To the gods in the ancient account, it becomes disturbance. This is where the story grows darker. The gods do not immediately erase humanity. Instead, disasters are sent in stages. Disease comes, then scarcity, then famine. Each crisis reduces human noise for a time. Each one acts like a divine attempt to control the swelling presence of mankind. What ancient texts describe, sequence of cosmic pressure and divine response. What historians see is a mythic explanation for suffering, mortality, and the fragile limits of civilization. What modern interpretation may suggest is a symbolic reflection on population, resources, anxiety, and the fear that human society can grow beyond balance. The story does not begin with humans as rulers. It begins with gods laboring. In Atrahasis, the lesser gods are burdened with work. They dig canals. They perform heavy labor. Eventually, they rebel against the harshness of their task. The divine world faces a crisis. Who will do the work necessary to sustain the ordered world? The solution is the creation of humans. Human beings are made to carry labor. They are fashioned so the gods may rest. This is not the same idea as a modern story of human dignity and freedom. It is a severe vision. Humanity exists because work must be done. The fields must be served. The canals must be maintained. The earth must be productive. The burden has been transferred. Could this be one of the oldest reflections on why human life is filled with labor? The myth does not say humans invented hardship. It says hardship belongs to their purpose. They are created into obligation. Their bodies are part clay, part divine element, marked by a connection to both earth and God. This double nature is profound. Human beings are low enough to work in mud, but sacred enough to disturb heaven. That is the contradiction at the center of the story. Humans are servants, yet they become powerful through multiplication. They are made to reduce divine labor, yet their growth creates divine unrest. They are born to sustain order, yet their existence threatens to overwhelm it. This tension turns the ancient cycle into something more complex than simple punishment. The gods need humanity, but fear humanity. Humanity depends on the gods, but burdens them. Creation is not peaceful, it is a compromise, and compromises can fail. The goddess involved in human creation is often associated with birth, womb, and motherly formation. Different versions and traditions use names such as Nintu, Mami, or Belet Ili. She is not a minor figure. She stands at the place where clay becomes life. Through her, humanity enters the world. Yet the same world that receives human life soon tries to limit it. There is a tragic irony here. The Divine Mother helps create humans, and another divine force seeks to reduce them. Birth and destruction exist inside the same cosmic system. Life is wanted, but not without measure. What if the ancient scribes were preserving a memory of a universe where even creation came with restrictions? The disasters in the Atrahasis tradition do not arrive as random punishments. They follow a pattern. When humans grow too numerous and loud, Enlil sends affliction. But Enki, the wise and cunning god, connected with water, intelligence, and secret counsel, intervenes. He does not always confront the divine assembly directly. Instead, he gives indirect guidance, helping humanity respond to each crisis. This creates a hidden drama between divine powers. One god seeks silence, another preserves life, one demands reduction, another sends knowledge. The fate of humanity turns not only on human behavior, but on disagreement among the gods themselves. That idea is striking. The divine world is not presented as a single smooth will. It contains debate, frustration, sympathy, strategy, and conflict. The gods are powerful, but their decisions unfold through tension. Humanity survives because the divine order is not unanimous. Could survival depend on a crack inside heaven? Modern readers often look for morality in ancient myths. They ask, what did humans do wrong? But Atrahasis is more disturbing because the offense is not clearly wickedness in the ordinary sense. Humans are noisy because they are alive. They multiply because life multiplies. They labor because they were created to labor. Their very success becomes the problem. This makes the myth psychologically powerful. It speaks to a fear that still lives inside civilization. What happens when growth becomes threat? A field that produces grain is good. Too much demand on the field drains it. A city that gathers people is strong. Too many people without balance creates hunger, conflict, and disease. A voice is human. Millions of voices become a roar. The myth translates social pressure into divine insomnia. The gods cannot sleep. That image is unforgettable. It turns the universe into a household disturbed by its own servants. Humanity was created to make divine rest possible, yet humanity's increase destroys that rest. The solution becomes horrifyingly logical. Within the story, reduce the noise, reduce the humans, The first methods are not total destruction. Disease and famine are forms of pressure. They do not erase humanity completely. They regulate. They cut down numbers. They force attention to limits. Historians do not treat these episodes as scientific accounts of epidemics or droughts. They are theological storytelling, but they may reflect real ancient experiences. Mesopotamian communities knew disease. They knew failed harvests. They knew hunger. They knew that canals, rainfall, river behavior, and political order could decide life and death. The myth gives these recurring crises a cosmic explanation. It says suffering is not merely suffering, it is part of a negotiation between human expansion and divine tolerance. That is a chilling worldview, because it means humanity is never fully safe, not even when it obeys, not even when it works, not even when it fulfills the reason for which it was created. The danger is built into the arrangement. Human beings must multiply to continue, but if they multiply too much, they provoke response. This is a cycle of creation, growth, disturbance, reduction, survival, and renewed growth. It is not a straight path toward progress. It is a pulse. Civilization expands, then is checked. Life rises, then is cut back. Humanity becomes visible, then is forced to remember its limits. What would it mean to live inside such a belief? A farmer watching crops fail might wonder whether the world was out of balance. A mother losing a child might understand grief through divine decree. A priest hearing a city filled with conflict might fear that human noise was rising again. A ruler facing famine might not see only weather and administration, but a sacred crisis demanding ritual, order, and appeasement. In this world, survival required more than strength. It required listening. Listening to omens, listening to priests, listening to dreams, listening to old stories, listening to warnings spoken indirectly. Enki's role in the tradition matters because wisdom often arrives disguised. It may not come as a public announcement. It may come as a whispered instruction, a ritual clue, a message through a wall, a pattern only the attentive can recognize. So the danger of noise is also spiritual. When humanity becomes too loud, perhaps it loses the ability to hear. That is a modern interpretation, not a direct ancient statement. Yet it fits the symbolic force of the story. Noise fills the world. Warnings become harder to perceive. The more civilization expands, the more it trusts its own sound. Markets, temples, rulers, workers, festivals, and armies create a roar of confidence. But beneath that roar, something may be shifting. The ancient myth asks whether humanity can remain within limits without being broken by them. It does not offer an easy answer. The gods create humans because they need labor. Humans multiply because life pushes forward. Divine discomfort grows. Disasters arrive. Wisdom intervenes. The pattern repeats until the pressure becomes too great for partial measures. The story moves toward the most extreme solution, but the deeper mystery has already been revealed. Humanity's future is not threatened only by wickedness, it is threatened by imbalance. A civilization can become endangered not because it has failed to grow, but because it has grown without measure. It can become loud enough to disturb the powers it depends on. It can become so full of its own activity that it forgets the fragile silence beneath existence. And in the ancient Mesopotamian imagination, when heaven can no longer sleep, the earth begins to tremble. If human life was created to serve divine order, why did that same life become the sound the gods wanted to silence? What if the future of humanity was not decided only in the sky, but in the dark places beneath the earth? In Sumerian imagination, the underworld was not a place of fiery punishment in the later moral sense. It was not a shining paradise either. It was a realm of dust, shadow, silence, and separation, a place where the dead continued in a dim existence, cut off from the brightness of ordinary life. And into that realm, one of the most powerful goddesses in Mesopotamian religion chose to descend. Her name was Inanna. She was goddess of love, desire, battle, kingship, beauty, power, and terrible transformation. She was not gentle in any simple way. She could be seductive, radiant, violent, ambitious, generous, and devastating. She was the morning and evening star, the bright planet Venus, appearing and disappearing in the sky like a divine signal. But the ancient text does not show her remaining safely above. It says, Inanna set her heart on the great below. That phrase alone feels like a door opening. Why would a goddess of brilliance go downward into the land of no return? The Sumerian poem, often called Inanna's Descent to the Underworld, presents one of the most haunting ritual journeys preserved from ancient Mesopotamia. The goddess dresses herself in symbols of authority. She wears her crown. She carries divine powers. She adorns herself with jewels, garments, and signs of status. She is not entering the underworld as a helpless victim. She arrives as a queen, armed with identity. But the underworld has its own queen. Ereshkigal rules below. She is Inanna's sister in the mythic world, yet she belongs to a different kind of power. Inanna shines, moves, conquers, loves, and disrupts. Ereshkigal sits in darkness, bound to the realm of the dead, surrounded by laws that even gods cannot casually ignore. The meeting of these two goddesses is not merely family drama. It is a collision between two cosmic realities, above and below, life and death, desire and stillness, expansion and limit. Inanna commands that the gate of the underworld be opened, but entry is not simple. The great below is protected by gates, and at each gate the goddess is stopped. At each threshold, one of her ornaments or garments is removed. Her crown is taken, her beads are taken, her breastplate is taken, her ring is taken, her measuring rod and line are taken. Her garment is taken, step by step. Inanna is stripped of the symbols that made her powerful in the world above. This is one of the most psychologically powerful images in ancient literature. A goddess enters death fully adorned, but death does not recognize decoration. Status cannot pass unchanged through the gates. Authority cannot enter intact. Beauty cannot bargain with the dust. Every sign of worldly identity is removed. What if the underworld is the place where nothing false can remain attached to the soul? That is a modern interpretation, not a literal Sumerian doctrine of personal, spiritual purification. The ancient text is concerned with divine law, ritual reversal, cosmic boundary, and the danger of crossing into forbidden territory. But the image has survived because it speaks to something humans understand instantly. Death strips. A king and a servant may be buried differently. One may receive offerings, goods, lamentation, and a tomb. The other may vanish with little record, yet both pass beyond ordinary breath. Both are removed from the visible city. Both become dependent on memory, ritual, and the living. Inanna's descent makes the stripping visible. By the time she reaches Ereshkigal, she is naked and bowed low. The shining goddess has been reduced. The powers of the upper world no longer protect her. She is judged, struck, and turned into a corpse. The text describes her dead body hung on a hook. For a goddess, this is almost unimaginable. Inanna does not merely visit death. She becomes death's possession. Now the myth reveals a terrible law. Even divine force cannot enter the underworld and leave freely. The great below is not a landscape for curiosity. It is a system. It has rules. It demands payment. Once someone crosses the boundary, return is not automatic. This matters for understanding the ancient cycle. Life does not renew itself without cost. Descent is not a symbolic vacation. Return requires negotiation, intervention, and exchange. Before descending, Inanna gives instructions to her attendant, Ninshubur. If she does not return, Ninshubur must seek help from the gods. This detail is crucial. Inanna, bold as she is, knows the descent may trap her. Her survival depends on a messenger, memory, and loyalty in the world above. A person who enters danger alone may vanish. A person remembered may still be reached. In ancient Mesopotamian death practice, care for the dead mattered deeply. Offerings, funerary rites, and remembrance were not sentimental additions. They helped maintain the relationship between the living and the dead. The dead needed the living. The living feared the restless dead. The boundary between worlds had to be managed. Inanna's story magnifies that belief on a divine scale. When she is trapped below, the world above must respond. Ninshubur goes to the gods. Some refuse to help, but Enki, the god of wisdom and clever rescue, creates two strange beings, neither fully male nor female in ordinary terms. They are sent into the underworld with the food and water of life. Their mission is not to fight Ereshkigal. They do something more subtle. They listen to her pain. Ereshkigal is groaning like a woman in labor. The rulers of death is herself in agony. The rescuers do not challenge her. They mirror her suffering. When she cries out, they echo her. When she laments, they respond with sympathy. Because they honor her pain, she offers them a gift. They ask for Inanna's corpse. This is a startling moment. The underworld queen is not defeated by violence. She is moved through recognition. What kind of myth places compassion inside the house of death? The beings sprinkle the food and water of life on Inanna, and she rises. But even this does not end the danger. The underworld does not release without replacement. If Inanna returns, someone else must go in her place. This is one of the oldest and most severe statements of balance in Mesopotamian myth. No return without exchange, no ascent without descent elsewhere, no life reclaimed without a substitute entering shadow. Inanna rises from the underworld, accompanied by demonic beings who demand that someone be given to take her place. She encounters those who mourned for her, and she spares them. Then she finds Dumuzi, her husband, seated in splendor rather than grieving. Her response is fierce. Dumuzi is marked for the underworld. This moment has troubled interpreters for generations. Is Inanna vengeful? Is Dumuzi guilty of failing proper mourning? Is the myth preserving ritual traditions connected with seasonal dying and returning gods? Is it dramatizing the dangerous relationship between erotic love, royal power, and death? Historians and scholars approach carefully. Dumuzi, known later as Tammuz, was associated with shepherding, fertility, vegetation, and lamentation traditions. His disappearance and mourning became part of a wider, ancient Near Eastern pattern of divine loss connected with seasonal cycles and ritual grief. But the Sumerian material is not a simple nature allegory. It is stranger, harsher, and more human. Dumuzi is not merely a plant dying in summer heat. He is a beloved figure hunted, seized, mourned, and divided between worlds. His sister Geshtinana enters the drama and shares his fate for part of the time, creating an alternating pattern of presence and absence. Here the cycle becomes intimate, not kingship moving across cities, not a flood washing away the world, not humanity growing too loud. This is the cycle of loss inside the household, the marriage bed, the sibling bond, the grieving heart. The cosmos is not only managed through kings and temples, it is also felt through love and mourning. The disappearance of Dumuzi would have resonated with anyone who had watched a loved one taken into death, anyone who had performed laments, anyone who had placed offerings for the dead and wondered whether the departed still hungered in the dark. What if civilization is not judged only by how it builds, but by how it mourns? The descent myth suggests that renewal is never clean. When Inanna returns, joy is mixed with terror. Life comes back, but someone else must descend. The restored goddess is not innocent. The underworld follows her. The dead do not simply release what they have taken. This is why the myth remains so powerful. It refuses a simple victory over death. Inanna rises, but death keeps its rights. The cycle continues because no realm is allowed to dominate completely. The upper world needs vitality, desire, fertility, and power. The lower world demands its share. For ancient listeners, this may have reflected the unavoidable rhythm of existence. Crops grow and wither. Lovers unite and separate. Kings are enthroned and buried. Children are born into households where ancestors are already waiting in memory. Every act of life casts a shadow, because everything living moves toward the underworld. Yet the myth also preserves hope, but not an easy hope. There is rescue, there is return, there is a way through the gates, but only through humility, loyalty, wisdom, sympathy, and sacrifice. Inanna cannot keep every ornament. She cannot command death as if it were one more city to conquer. She cannot rise without consequence. The Queen of Heaven must learn that the Queen below has power too. This gives the ancient cycle a deeper shape. Humanity's future is not decided only by growth, rule, punishment, or survival. It is also decided by whether life remembers its debt to death. A society that forgets the dead becomes spiritually dangerous. A ruler who forgets mortality becomes monstrous. A civilization that celebrates ascent but denies descent loses contact with half of reality. The Sumerians did not imagine a modern afterlife of personal reward in the way later traditions would. Their underworld was bleak, dusty, and communal. Yet because it was bleak, ritual memory mattered even more. The living had responsibilities. The dead had needs. The boundary had to be honored. Inanna's descent turns that boundary into a journey. She goes down radiant. She is stripped. She dies. She is revived. She returns. But the world is not restored to simplicity. A substitute must be found. Grief must be distributed. The cycle must continue. Perhaps this is why the story never feels like a myth of escape. It feels like a revelation of law. Nothing living escapes the pattern entirely. Even gods must bow at the gates. Even beauty must enter darkness. Even return carries a price. And if the brightest goddess of Sumer could not pass through the underworld unchanged, what part of humanity believes it can build a future without descending into its own shadow? What if the sky was not empty space to the ancient Mesopotamians, but a tablet written in light? To a modern observer, the stars may seem distant, beautiful, silent. They belong to science, navigation, calendars, and wonder. But in ancient Mesopotamia, the heavens were alive with meaning. The sky was watched not only for beauty, but for warning. A bright planet, a strange halo around the moon, a darkened sun, a comet-like appearance, or an unusual eclipse could become part of a vast language of fate. The future was not imagined as completely hidden. It was written above. The question was whether human beings could read it in time. Picture a temple scholar standing under a night sky in southern Mesopotamia. The city has quieted. Torches burn near temple courtyards. The air is dry. The horizon stretches flat and open. Above him, the stars seem close enough to belong to the world of gods. He does not watch casually. He observes. He remembers patterns. He compares what he sees with old records. He asks whether the heavens are repeating a sign once seen in another age. Could the same sky reveal the destiny of a king, a city, or an empire? This was not astronomy in the modern sense, but it was not ignorance either. Mesopotamian skywatchers developed careful habits of observation across centuries. They tracked the moon, planets, stars, seasons, eclipses, and celestial appearances. Their work eventually contributed to mathematical astronomy of remarkable sophistication. But long before the sky became a field of calculation alone, it was also a field of omens. An omen was not a random superstition in the simple sense. It was a structured relationship between sign and consequence. If a certain event appeared in the heavens, something might happen on earth. A lunar eclipse might signal danger to a ruler. A planet's position might be connected with war, famine, disease, flood, rebellion, or prosperity. The sky did not cause events in a mechanical way like a machine. It announced them. It reflected the will of the divine order. The heavens were a message system. That belief changes how destiny feels. Fate is not sealed in silence. It gives signals. It flickers, it darkens, it appears at dawn, it hides behind cloud, it rises in the wrong place at the wrong time, it asks to be interpreted. The Mesopotamian world developed large omen traditions with series of tablets collecting signs from the heavens and connecting them to possible outcomes. Modern historians study these texts as evidence of scholarly culture, religious thought, political anxiety, and early systematic observation. The ancient scholars were not simply gazing upward and inventing meanings on the spot. They worked inside traditions, lists, patterns, comparisons, and inherited interpretations. A single sign mattered because it belonged to a library of signs. This is where the star-filled sky becomes connected to power. The king depended on divine favor, and the heavens could reveal whether that favor was secure. If the moon darkened in eclipse, the event could terrify a court, not because people had never seen darkness, but because darkness in the wrong celestial body at the wrong moment suggested cosmic disturbance. The king's life, throne, and land might be at risk. What does a ruler do when the sky itself seems to accuse him? In some Mesopotamian traditions, rituals could be performed to respond to ominous signs. One of the most dramatic practices known from Mesopotamian royal culture was the substitute king ritual. When an eclipse or omen suggested danger to the king, a substitute could be placed temporarily in the royal role, absorbing the threatened fate. The real king withdrew from visibility, while ritual action attempted to divert disaster. This is one of the most startling ideas in the ancient world. Fate could be read, fate could be feared, fate might even be redirected. Yet redirected did not mean erased without cost. The substitute stood in a dangerous place. Royal identity, normally treated as sacred and powerful, became something that could attract disaster. The throne was not only a seat of glory, it was a lightning rod for cosmic judgment. This reveals a deeper anxiety in Mesopotamian kingship. The higher a person stood, the more exposed he became to heaven. Ordinary people suffered disease, hunger, debt, loss, and death. But the king carried the fate of the land. If omens threatened him, they threatened the entire structure of order. The sky, therefore, measured more than time. It measured vulnerability. The moon was especially important. Its phases shaped calendars, rituals, months, festivals, and timekeeping. A new crescent could announce beginnings. A full moon could illuminate the night with sacred regularity. When that regularity was disturbed, meaning surged into the disturbance, the sun also carried immense symbolic force. It saw all things. It crossed the heavens like a judge moving above human concealment. The planet Venus, associated with Inanna and later Ishtar, was a brilliant and unpredictable presence, appearing as morning star and evening star, vanishing for intervals, then returning. Its cycle made disappearance and reappearance visible in the sky itself. Here mythology and observation meet. A goddess who moves between presence and absence is mirrored by a planet that appears, disappears, and appears again. Ancient people did not separate symbol and sky the way modern categories often do. A celestial body could be a physical appearance, a divine manifestation, a calendar marker, and an omen at once. What if the cycle of humanity was imagined not only through cities and disasters, but through repeated celestial rhythms, day and night, waxing and waning moon, rising and setting stars, seasonal return, planetary disappearance and reappearance, eclipse and restoration? These patterns taught a powerful lesson. Order is repetition, but repetition is never free from danger. The moon usually returns, but an eclipse can interrupt it. Venus returns, but only after absence. The sun rises daily, but storms, dust, and darkness can conceal it. The heavens are regular enough to trust, yet mysterious enough to fear. That combination is perfect for omen thinking. If everything were chaos, no sign could be read. If everything were predictable, no omen would matter. Mesopotamian divination lived between order and uncertainty. The world had patterns, but the patterns had to be interpreted. This made the scholar a crucial figure. The scribe, diviner, astronomer, priest, and learned advisor could stand between sign and decision. He could tell the court what the heavens meant, what rituals might be needed, which days were dangerous, which signs required attention. Knowledge became protection, but knowledge also created fear. A person who does not read the sky may sleep beneath an eclipse and feel only wonder. A person trained in omens may see the same darkness and imagine the collapse of a dynasty. The more signs one knows, the more fragile the world becomes. Could wisdom become a burden too heavy to carry? The great Mesopotamian omen collections show a civilization determined to make uncertainty readable. Strange births, animal behavior, dreams, oil patterns, smoke, liver markings, weather, and stars could all become signs. The world was saturated with messages. Nothing was entirely mute, yet celestial omens had special power because they appeared above everyone. A private dream belonged to one sleeper. A liver omen belonged to a ritual moment, but the sky belonged to the whole land. When the moon darkened, no city could deny that something had happened. This public nature gave celestial signs political force. Imagine a court receiving news of an eclipse. Messengers arrive, scholars compare tablets, priests prepare rites, officials whisper. The king's enemies might hear of the omen and become bold. Allies might grow nervous. The people might fear famine or war. A shadow across the moon could ripple through an entire political system. The sky did not need an army to shake a kingdom. This is one reason ancient rulers cared deeply about interpretation. Meaning itself could stabilize or destabilize power. If scholars could name the omen, place it in tradition, and prescribe ritual response, then fear became manageable. If no one understood the sign, terror expanded. The universe was safest when it could be read. Modern interpretation sees in this a profound human need. Civilizations depend on prediction. Farmers predict seasons. Sailors read winds. Kings estimate rivals. Merchants calculate risk. Families plan births, marriages, debts, and inheritances. To live is to ask what is coming. Mesopotamian sky divination turned that need into sacred science. It took anxiety about the future and gave it a method, not a modern scientific method in its assumptions, but a disciplined cultural method shaped by records, observation, and interpretation. The heavens became an archive. Each appearance could be compared with memory. Each sign could be linked to a possible consequence. Each generation of scholars inherited the work of those who watched before them. Clay tablets became earthly reflections of the celestial tablet above. That image is almost poetic. The sky writes in light. The scribe writes in clay. Between them, fate becomes a conversation. But there is a disturbing question hidden inside this cosmic system. If the future can be signaled, does that mean it can be changed? Some Mesopotamian rituals suggest that danger could be addressed, softened, redirected, or ritually contained. But the omen tradition does not imply that humans fully control destiny. Rather, it suggests that knowledge creates responsibility. To receive a warning and ignore it is dangerous. To read a sign and fail to act is to become part of the disaster. A warning is a gift only if someone responds. This idea makes the ancient cycle feel sharper. Humanity does not simply suffer fate blindly. Signs appear, patterns repeat, the world warns. But human beings, especially rulers and scholars, must decide whether they are listening or merely watching. The night sky then becomes a moral mirror. It asks whether civilization is attentive. It asks whether power can humble itself before signs greater than ambition. It asks whether knowledge will be used for restoration or control. It asks whether a city can recognize danger before the walls begin to crack. The stars do not shout. They move in silence. That silence may be the reason they were so frightening. A flood roars. An army screams. A famine groans in empty stomachs. But an omen in the sky can appear without sound and still alter the fate of a kingdom. The ancient Mesopotamians looked upward and saw order, warning, beauty, mathematics, divinity, and fear woven together. They saw a universe that did not leave humanity alone, but did not speak plainly either. The future was not handed over in open sentences. It came in shadows, lights, patterns, disappearances, and returns. And perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson of their sky-watching world. A civilization may not fall because there were no warnings. It may fall because the warnings were visible, recorded, interpreted, and still not enough to change the human heart. If the heavens were always measuring the fate of kings and cities, what sign would reveal that humanity had already entered the dangerous part of its cycle? What happens when a city believes the gods have left? In ancient Mesopotamia, the fall of a city was not only a military defeat. It could be imagined as a wound in the sacred order itself. Walls did not merely collapse because soldiers broke them. Temples did not merely fall silent because enemies entered their courtyards. A city's destruction could mean that the divine powers who once protected it had withdrawn their presence. This idea reaches one of its most haunting expressions in the fall of Ur. Ur was not an ordinary city. It stood in southern Mesopotamia as one of the great centers of Sumerian civilization, associated especially with the moon god Nana, its temple complex, its ziggurat, its royal power, its scribal culture, and its long memory made it a city where earthly rule and divine favor seemed fused together. To approach Ur in its sacred age was to see more than walls and streets. Imagine the ziggurat rising from the flatland like a mountain made by human hands. Its terraces lifted the temple toward the sky. Processions moved through ceremonial spaces. Offerings were prepared. Scribes recorded grain, wool, labor, land, and animals. Priests tended the cult of Nana, whose lunar rhythm marked time in the heavens and meaning on the earth. The city was a machine of order, yet even machines of order can break. The dynasty, often called the Third Dynasty of Ur, built an impressive state structure. Its rulers projected authority across much of southern Mesopotamia. They organized administration on a vast scale. Thousands of tablets from this world revealed taxation, labor systems, rations, livestock management, craft production, fields, officials, and institutions. It was a civilization deeply committed to recording itself. That is part of the tragedy. Left behind not only ruins, but evidence of intense organization. This was not a world without structure. It was a world filled with structure. It counted, it classified, it managed, it planned, it built, it wrote, and still it fell. Why does a highly organized civilization collapse? The ancient lamentation literature answers differently than modern history. Modern historians discuss pressures that may have included military threats, internal instability, changing political alliances, incursions by Elamite forces, movements of Amorite groups, strain on administration, environmental stress, and the difficulty of holding together a large territorial state. None of these factors alone should be treated as a simple magic key. Collapse is rarely one event, it is usually a convergence. The ancient poets describe something deeper and more terrifying. They describe abandonment in the laments for destroyed cities. The gods are sometimes imagined as leaving their temples. The divine presence departs. The protective force withdraws. The city, once filled with sacred life, becomes exposed. Its gates are vulnerable. Its people cry out. The temple is violated. The streets become scenes of grief. The ordered world turns into a landscape of lamentation. What if the most frightening moment in a civilization is not the arrival of enemies, but the belief that protection has already departed? The lament for gives literary shape to this terror. It mourns the city's destruction and frames it within divine decision. The goddess Ningal, associated with and wife of Nana, pleads for her city. She weeps. She intercedes. She tries to avert the destruction, but the fate cannot be reversed. The decree has been issued. Must fall. This is not simple reporting. It is sacred poetry. It takes political catastrophe and turns it into cosmic grief. The destruction of a city becomes an event felt by gods and humans together. That detail matters. The gods are not shown as entirely emotionless. Ningal grieves. The divine world contains sorrow. Yet sorrow does not prevent fate. Tears do not cancel decree. Even a goddess may weep for a city she cannot save. Could there be any more devastating image of sacred order than a goddess crying over her own temple? The people of would have understood the horror of temple loss. A temple was not merely a symbol of religion. It was the house of the deity. If the god's house was damaged, neglected, plundered, or abandoned, the city's relationship with heaven had been ruptured. The center no longer held. In the lament tradition, destruction is described with sensory force. Streets, once full of activity, become desolate. Bodies lie unburied. Families are torn apart. Storehouses are emptied. Sacred spaces are desecrated. Songs turn into cries. The city that once sounded with ritual, trade, labor, and authority becomes a place of dust and mourning. This is where the ancient imagination becomes painfully human. Behind every phrase about divine decree, there are people, mothers looking for children, workers losing homes, priests watching sacred routines collapse, scribes unable to preserve order with tablets, soldiers dying at gates, families carried away, survivors asking why the city that seemed chosen was allowed to fall. The fall of Ur was not only about kings, it was about trust. A civilization teaches its people what to trust. Trust the walls, trust the ruler, trust the temple, trust the calendar, trust the rituals, trust the records, trust the gods who dwell here, trust the belief that tomorrow will resemble today, enough for labor to matter. Collapse destroys that trust. The last king of the Ur-the-Thrur dynasty, Ibbi-Sin, became part of this memory of decline. His reign saw the unraveling of central authority. Cities and regions broke away. Rival powers grew. The state's ability to command loyalty and resources weakened. The final blow came with the capture and destruction associated with Elamite attack. Ibbi-Sin was taken away, and Ur's imperial order ended. Modern history can describe these events in political terms. The ancient lament asks what they meant. Meaning is not a small thing. A society can survive hunger more easily when hunger has meaning. A community can endure defeat more strongly when defeat has explanation. But when the explanation is divine abandonment, grief becomes metaphysical. The people are not merely conquered, they feel forsaken. This is the dreadful power of the laments. They do not only say, "The enemy came," they say, "The sacred order was withdrawn." The difference is enormous. If an enemy defeats you, perhaps you can rebuild stronger walls. If a god abandons you, what wall can help? If administration fails, perhaps a wiser official can repair it. If fate has been decreed in heaven, what human reform can reverse it? And yet the laments themselves are an act of resistance against total erasure. To lament is to remember. To name the city is to refuse silence. To describe the destruction is to make grief into sacred record. The ruined city is not allowed to vanish without testimony. Its suffering is pressed into literature, recited, copied, preserved. What if a lament is a way of keeping a dead city alive? This is one of the most moving features of Mesopotamian civilization. Destruction did not end speech. The fall of a city could become a genre, a ritual memory, a theological reflection. Lamentation gave shape to pain. It allowed survivors and later generations to ask how sacred order collapses and whether restoration remains possible. The fall of Ur also reveals a new part of the cycle. Destruction is not always imagined as a watery catastrophe or divine response to human noise. Sometimes the cycle turns through politics, war, failed leadership, rival peoples, economic pressure, and the weakening of central power. Yet ancient interpretation gathers these forces under the shadow of divine decision. That does not mean the ancients ignored human causes. They knew armies existed. They knew enemies attacked. They knew kings failed. But they placed human events inside a wider framework. Earthly collapse was the visible surface of a deeper disorder. This is why Ur's fall still feels so important. It joins archaeology, history, and sacred grief in one event. The tablets show a complex state. The ruins show material reality. The royal records show ambition. The laments show trauma. Together, they create a portrait of civilization at the moment its confidence breaks. A city can be advanced and fragile at the same time. It can have scribes and still lose memory. It can have temples and still feel abandoned. It can have rulers and still lose authority. It can have records and still fail to understand the full danger until the pattern has already turned. That lesson is not comfortable. Modern people often imagine collapse as something that happens to primitive or poorly organized societies. Challenges that illusion. Its world had bureaucracy, architecture, religion, economic management, royal ideology, and deep scribal learning. Its leaders were not living in chaos. They were trying to manage a vast and complicated order. Complexity can become strength, but it can also become weight. The more a system must maintain, the more ways it can strain. Canals must work. Officials must obey. Temples must be supplied. Armies must be paid. Borderlands must remain loyal. Grain must move. Labor must be organized. Rulers must command belief. The whole structure depends on movement, trust, and repeated performance. When enough parts weaken, collapse can feel sudden even when it has been approaching quietly. Perhaps that is why the ancient poets imagined the decree as already decided. By the time the city hears the storm at its gates, the deeper decision has already occurred. The visible disaster arrives late. The invisible withdrawal comes first. This is a terrifying thought. A civilization may lose its future inwardly before its monuments fall outwardly. The laments for do not leave the listener with simple despair. Their existence suggests that memory can survive devastation. The city's sacred identity endured through text, ritual imagination, and later remembrance. Did not remain the center of a great empire, but its name continued to carry power. Its ruins remained. Its god remained in tradition. Its fall became a warning shaped by poetry. Still, the warning is severe. Do not assume sacred order is permanent. Do not assume a powerful city cannot become dust. Do not assume divine favor, political strength, economic organization, and inherited prestige will always remain aligned. Ur's tragedy is the tragedy of a civilization that had every reason to believe it mattered in the eyes of heaven. Then its people had to confront the possibility that being chosen did not mean being untouchable. If a city as sacred as could fall while its goddess wept, what protection can any civilization truly claim when the order beneath it begins to withdraw? What happens when one civilization inherits another civilization's sacred memories, then rewrites them around a new center of power? Babylon did not appear in an empty world. It rose in a land already crowded with ancient names, ruined temples, royal inscriptions, old gods, sacred stories, and scribal traditions that reached deep into Sumerian memory. By the time Babylon became a great political and religious center, the south of Mesopotamia had already produced myths of creation, kingship, divine decrees, flood, underworld descent, celestial omens, and city collapse. But Babylon did something extraordinary with that inheritance. It did not simply preserve the old stories like museum objects. It reorganized them. It took ancient patterns and placed them around a new divine throne. At the center stood Marduk, the god of Babylon, who rose from local importance into cosmic supremacy. In this transformation, the cycle of humanity's future became tied not only to ancient kingship or sacred cities, but to the victory of order over chaos. The most famous expression of this transformation appears in the Babylonian creation epic, often known by its opening words, "When on high." In that ancient account, the world begins not with human beings, not with cities, not with kings, but with divine waters. Apsu and Tiamat represent primeval powers, mingled in a state where the ordered world has not yet taken shape. Then divine conflict erupts. The younger gods disturb the older powers. Apsu plans destruction. Tiamat becomes a terrifying force of chaos, gathering monstrous beings and preparing for war. The divine world trembles, and no god seems able to face her. Then Marduk steps forward, but he does not fight without condition. He demands supreme authority. If he defeats Tiamat, the gods must grant him kingship among them. The battlefield becomes a political moment. Cosmic victory and divine rule are fused together. What ancient texts describe is a universe where order is born through conflict and authority is justified by the power to defeat chaos. What historians see is also a reflection of Babylon's rise, a city projecting its god as ruler of the divine assembly. What modern interpretation suggests is that mythology here becomes imperial theology, a sacred explanation for why Babylon should stand at the center of the world. That does not make the myth false to the people who revered it. It means the myth worked on several levels at once. In the epic, Marduk defeats Tiamat and divides her body to form the cosmos. From the body of chaos, ordered reality is shaped. Heaven and earth are established. Boundaries are set. Stars are arranged. Time is organized. The universe becomes structured because chaos has been conquered and transformed. This is a brutal and powerful image. The world is not created from nothing. It is made from a defeated threat. Could civilization itself be imagined the same way? A city rises out of marsh, dust, labor, conflict, fear, and divine command. A kingdom forms by overcoming rivals. A law code appears because disorder must be restrained. A temple stands because sacred presence must be housed inside walls. Order is not gentle. It is carved out of danger. In the Babylonian vision, humanity is created only when the divine order needs workers. A rebel divine figure is killed, and from his blood, human beings are formed to carry labor for the gods. This resembles a broader Mesopotamian idea that humans exist to serve divine needs. But the Babylonian epic places that idea inside Marduk's triumph. Human life begins inside a world already marked by battle, sacrifice, hierarchy, and service. That is unsettling. Human beings are not created at the center of the story. They are created as part of the maintenance of a cosmic system. Their purpose is not unlimited freedom. Their purpose is service within order. And yet, this service makes civilization possible. Temples require offerings. Gods require cult. Cities require labor. Fields require irrigation. The cosmic order must be sustained through human action. Humanity may be low in rank compared with the gods, but without human service, the divine houses on earth do not function. This creates a strange dignity. Human beings are servants, but they are necessary servants. They are made from the residue of divine conflict, yet they become caretakers of sacred order. Babylon also inherited the Mesopotamian obsession with destiny. In the creation epic, Power is tied to the ability to command, decree, and establish names. Naming is not casual. To name something is to fix its identity within the cosmos. Marduk's elevation is celebrated through many names, each revealing a different aspect of his authority. This matters because ancient Mesopotamian thought gave great power to names and decrees. A destiny spoken by the gods could shape reality. A divine assembly could determine what must happen. A tablet of destinies could symbolize control over the order of the universe. Whoever holds destiny controls the pattern. That idea turns mythology into a mirror of politics. A king who controls decrees governs the land. A god who controls destinies governs the cosmos. A city whose god controls destinies claims sacred centrality. Babylon's rise was therefore not only military or administrative, it was imaginative. It placed itself inside the deepest structure of reality. Its god was not merely one divine protector among many. Marduk became the organizer of heaven and earth, the one who fixed the stars, established divine stations, and gave order to the world. Picture the great city during festival time. Processions move through streets. Divine statues are carried. Priests chant. The people see ritual theater unfold as cosmic drama. Babylon is not just a city of brick. It becomes the stage where the universe is renewed. The god's victory is remembered, performed, and made present again. The Akitu festival, associated with the new year, carried themes of kingship, renewal, divine order, and the relationship between the ruler and Marduk. Modern historians debate details across periods, but the broad significance is clear. Ritual helped renew the bond between city, king, god, and cosmos. This is crucial. The cycle is not only told, it is performed. A myth written on tablets can shape belief, but a ritual seen by thousands can shape reality for an entire population. The city watches order being restored. The king is placed under divine authority. The god is honored. The year begins with cosmic meaning. What if civilizations survive not only by building walls, but by reenacting the story that explains why the walls matter? Babylon's scribes were key to this inheritance. They copied Sumerian texts, studied old languages, preserved lexical lists, transmitted hymns, myths, omen series, rituals, and royal traditions. Sumerian itself remained a learned and sacred language long past its everyday spoken life. This means that Babylonian culture did not erase Sumer. It carried Sumer like a deep memory inside its schools and temples, but preservation was never neutral. When a scribe copies an ancient story, he preserves it. When a priest recites it in a new ritual setting, he reinterprets it. When a king associates himself with an ancient pattern, he claims it. When a city places its own god at the summit, it transforms the meaning of everything it inherited. This is how sacred memory evolves, not by disappearing, but by being absorbed into new arrangements of power. The old Sumerian concern with kingship became Babylonian concern with cosmic sovereignty. The old fear of disorder became the dramatic battle against Tiamat. The old service owed to gods became a theology of human labor inside Marduk's universe. The old city-centered worldview became a universal vision, with Babylon at the heart. Modern interpretation must be careful here. It is too simple to say Babylon merely stole Sumerian ideas. Ancient Mesopotamia was a long continuum of languages, peoples, political centers, divine names, and literary traditions. Stories moved, changed, and gained new force as scribes copied them and communities adapted them. Influence was not a single line, it was a river system, and like the rivers of Mesopotamia, the channels shifted. A Sumerian goddess could appear in Akkadian form. A local god could rise to national importance. A mythic theme could become part of royal ideology. A city's ritual could reshape cosmic memory. The past did not remain fixed. It became material for new futures. This may be the most important Babylonian development in the ancient cycle the future belongs to. Whoever controls the interpretation of the past. If a city can convince people that its god defeated chaos, its rituals renew the cosmos, its king serves the highest divine will, and its scribes guard the memory of creation, then political power becomes more than administration. It becomes destiny. But there is a danger hidden in that achievement. When a civilization places itself at the center of the cosmic order, it becomes difficult to imagine its own end. Babylon could absorb older stories of rise, fall, warning, flood, and divine judgment, yet still present itself as the place where order had finally been secured. That is the temptation of every great center. It inherits ruins, then believes it is not one of them, yet the very myths that glorified Babylon also whispered unease. Chaos was defeated, but chaos had existed first. Order was established, but order had to be renewed. Kingship was sacred, but kings could be tested. Humanity served the gods, but humanity could still become excessive. Destiny could be decreed, but signs still had to be read. The Babylonian system did not remove anxiety. It organized anxiety into ritual, theology, and scholarship. It gave people a way to stand inside a dangerous universe and say the pattern has meaning. The gods have spoken. The city has a role. The king has obligations. The year can be renewed. That is powerful. It is also fragile, because any system that must be renewed admits that it can fail. Any cosmic order that needs ritual maintenance admits that disorder waits nearby. Any city that celebrates the defeat of chaos must remember that chaos was strong enough to require a divine champion. Babylon inherited the ancient cycle and crowned it with Marduk. It turned old Sumerian memories into a grander architecture of cosmic kingship. It preserved the past, but also redirected it toward its own sacred center. And that leaves a final disturbing question inside the Babylonian achievement. If the story of humanity's future can be rewritten by the civilization powerful enough to control the sacred memory, how can anyone know whether they are living inside truth or inside the myth of the latest city that claimed to defeat chaos? What if ancient Sumerian texts do not reveal humanity's future by giving a date, a prophecy, or a hidden calendar, but by preserving a pattern? That possibility is more disturbing than a prediction. A prediction can be avoided, doubted, delayed, or dismissed. A pattern is harder to escape. It does not need one prophet, one king, one temple, or one empire. It moves through civilizations quietly. It appears in the rise of cities, the growth of power, the swelling of human noise, the neglect of limits, the appearance of warnings, the collapse of order, and the desperate attempt to begin again. The ancient scribes did not write like modern futurists. They did not describe satellites, machines, global politics, or the technologies of distant centuries. What they preserved was older and deeper a sacred memory of how human order is received, tested, broken, and restored. The mystery begins with a breathtaking claim: kingship descended from heaven. That phrase is not a small religious detail. It is the foundation of an entire world view. Civilization was not remembered as merely human invention. It was a gift, a responsibility, and perhaps a burden. To receive kingship was to receive order. To hold it was to stand beneath divine expectation. To lose it was to admit that no city, no ruler, and no dynasty possessed the future forever. This is the first resolved question. The ancient cycle is not simply about kings. It is about legitimacy. Who has the right to organize human life? Who holds authority? Who decides the calendar, the offerings, the walls, the canals, the laws, the labor, and the meaning of suffering in the Sumerian imagination? These questions could never be separated from heaven. Then the cities appear: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak. These names form a sacred geography of the earliest world. They are not only places on the earth, they are stations of memory, water, wisdom, craft, judgment, instruction, and warning seem to gather around them like fragments of a broken map. The ancient texts describe cities that receive kingship for impossible spans of time. Archaeologists discover real urban centers, temples, flood layers, pottery, walls, tablets, and long sequences of occupation. Historians separate mythic memory from material evidence. Modern interpretation asks why these cities became vessels for cosmic meaning. The answer is not simple, but one thing becomes clear. The city was humanity magnified. A city made human power visible. It gathered labor. It stored grain. It organized water. It built temples. It created scribes. It raised rulers above ordinary life. It allowed thousands of voices to become one system. But every system that magnifies human power also magnifies human danger. That is why the flood stands at the center of the ancient imagination. It is not only remembered as water, it is remembered as interruption. A world of cities and kings is suddenly divided by catastrophe. Time itself is cut open. There is a world on one side of the waters and another world on the other. What ancient texts describe is a cosmic reset. What archaeology can show is evidence of serious flooding in particular places. Not one simple universal event proven across the entire earth. What historians often suggest is that memories of devastating regional floods may have been transformed into sacred stories of world destruction. But the flood's power does not depend only on geology. The flood asks a question every civilization fears: what happens when the conditions that make order possible disappear? Water removes boundaries. It erases roads, fields, walls, and graves. It turns the carefully shaped world back into mud and current. In that sense, the flood is uncreation. It reverses the work of civilization. It shows that the human world can be dissolved. Yet one survivor is warned. That warning matters more than the boat itself. Survival comes through listening. In the Mesopotamian flood traditions, life continues because knowledge reaches someone in time. The future is not saved by arrogance, numbers, walls, or wealth. It is saved by attention. This is the second resolved question. The ancient cycle does not destroy humanity without signs. It gives warnings. It sends omens. It preserves teachings. It speaks through dreams, gods, rituals, stars, disasters, and memory. The tragedy is that warning and response are not the same thing. Humanity can be warned and still continue. That is why the tradition of human noise is so unsettling. In the Atrahasis story, humanity does not endanger itself by one dramatic act of evil. Humanity becomes too loud. It multiplies, expands, works, hungers, builds, and fills the earth with its own presence. The gods become disturbed. This is not a modern environmental theory. It is an ancient mythic expression, yet its symbolic force is unmistakable. Growth without measure becomes threat. Life itself becomes pressure when it forgets proportion. The sound of civilization rises until the powers above can no longer rest. Here the cycle becomes painfully recognizable. Creation leads to multiplication. Multiplication leads to disturbance. Disturbance leads to correction. Correction leads to suffering. Suffering leads to survival. Survival leads to renewed growth. Then the sound begins again. But the Sumerian and Mesopotamian imagination does not leave the cycle only in the realm of cities and gods. It sends the goddess Inanna down into the underworld. Her descent reveals another law: no one returns from the depths unchanged. Power is stripped. Beauty is stripped. Identity is stripped. The underworld demands a price. That myth resolves another piece of the mystery. Renewal is never free. A civilization that wants rebirth without sacrifice does not understand the depth it has entered. A ruler who wants power without humility does not understand the gates. A people who want progress without memory do not understand the dead beneath their foundations. The underworld reminds humanity that every future is built over loss. The stars then add another layer. Mesopotamian scholars watch the heavens not as empty space, but as a field of signs. The moon, planets, eclipses, and celestial patterns could warn kings and cities. The sky became a vast language of danger and timing. This does not mean the ancients possessed a secret scientific map of the modern future. It means they believed the universe was meaningful. Events were not isolated. The heavens, the city, the king, the temple, the harvest, and the human body belong to one interconnected order. A sign ignored was not meaningless. It was dangerous. Then falls, a sacred city, organized and powerful, full of administration, temple life, scribal records, and royal ambition, collapses into lament. The laments do not describe only military defeat. They describe divine abandonment. The gods depart. The city is exposed. The goddess weeps, but fate remains. This resolves another question. Collapse, in ancient Mesopotamian thought, was not merely the failure of walls, it was the failure of relationship. City and God, ruler and duty, people and order, ritual and reality. When those bonds broke, destruction became more than political. It became cosmic grief. Babylon then inherits the memory and reshapes it. Marduk rises as the champion of order against chaos. The old patterns are reorganized around a new center: creation, kingship, divine service, ritual renewal, and cosmic authority are brought under Babylon's sacred imagination. This reveals one of the most important truths about the ancient cycle. Every civilization inherits ruins and calls itself renewal. Every great city stands among memories of older powers that believed they would endure. It studies their texts, claims their symbols, rebuilds their temples, absorbs their gods, and tells a new story in which the pattern has finally found its true center. But the cycle remains. Order must still be renewed. Chaos still waits. Power still tempts. Warnings still appear. The human noise still rises. The underworld still takes its share. No civilization escapes simply by naming itself the final answer. So what do the ancient Sumerian texts truly reveal about humanity's future? Not a fixed prophecy, not a secret date, not a coded announcement of the end of the world. They reveal a structure of danger. They show that humanity receives power, then mistakes the gift for ownership. It builds cities, then mistakes organization for permanence. It multiplies, then mistakes growth for blessing. It reads signs, then mistakes knowledge for wisdom. It survives disaster, then mistakes survival for innocence. It mourns ruins, then builds new centers on top of them and declares the cycle broken. But the cycle is not broken by confidence. It is broken, if it can be broken at all, by remembrance. Remembering that power is borrowed. Remembering that cities are fragile. Remembering that warnings matter. Remembering that growth requires limits. Remembering that the dead remain part of the human story. Remembering that every civilization is judged not only by what it builds, but by what it refuses to hear. This is where the ancient mystery becomes personal. The Sumerian scribes pressed signs into clay because clay could outlive the voice. They wrote for kings, temples, students, rituals, archives, and gods. They couldn't know who would read their words thousands of years later. They could not know what future cities would rise, what languages would vanish, what empires would claim eternity, what machines would carry human noise into the sky. Yet their pattern survived. That survival is itself a warning. The tablets are broken, but not silent. The cities are ruined, but not meaningless. The myths are ancient, but not dead. They continue to ask whether humanity is awake enough to recognize the moment when order begins to withdraw. Perhaps the most frightening possibility is that the cycle does not decide the future by force. Perhaps it decides the future by revealing what human beings become when they are given power, memory, warning, and time. The ancient scribes left no final certainty. They left images, kingship descending, cities rising, waters covering the land, gods disturbed by human noise, a goddess stripped at the gates, stars measuring fate, a sacred city abandoned, a new empire claiming cosmic order. Together, those images form a mirror, and the mirror does not tell humanity what year the end will come. It asks something much harder. If the cycle has always been visible in the ruins of those who came before us, why does every civilization believe it will be the first one not to repeat it?